Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan. Today's Tuesday, June 17th, day 620 of the war. I'm here with our diplomatic reporter, Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Always such a pleasure to have you. Last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu updated the nation of the progress of the war with Iran, and Lazar will fill us in on the highlights or the main points of the Prime Minister's remarks. Missile barrages are ongoing, and just shortly before our recording, another barrage hit central Israel. We'll hear how much more retaliatory capabilities Israel thinks that Iran still has. We'll also learn about some optimism on another front, the ongoing war in Gaza, where 2 soldiers fell yesterday. All of this and more when we're back.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on 2 fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, Anachnu b'nei britecha, we choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic reporter, Lazar Berman. Lazar, 2 Israeli soldiers were killed fighting in separate incidents in the Gaza Strip yesterday. The military announced the first was Captain Tal Movshovitz from Reut, who was killed by an explosive device planted in a building in the Younis region. And hours later, Staff Sergeant Naveh Leshem, 20, from Nokdim, was killed, and 20 other soldiers were wounded. Lazar, there are now rumors of progress towards some kind of negotiated deal, hostage release situation, but we've been here before. I feel like many, many times we've been here before. So what is different about these rumors, if anything?
Well, of course, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves and too optimistic, if that's the right word. But we remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I believe it was 2 days ago, that there's been some movement on this front. It seems to be that there's a belief among Israeli officials who are involved in this that the fact that Iran is getting hit so hard will make Hamas realize that it's absolutely alone now and will be more willing to make a deal. So there's that on the one hand. And there's also on the Israeli side, there seems to be a growing faction within Israeli decision makers, including within the Prime Minister's office, that believes that perhaps the time is coming for Israel to push for an end to the war in general in Gaza, based on some of the proposals that we've heard, where Hamas, maybe it's not everything that Israel wanted, but you start bringing in some sort of alternative government and do whatever is needed to get the hostages out and say that, we've done a lot of what we wanted to do in Gaza, and now the time is, now we can look forward to the broader Middle East after we've hit Iran so hard. So those are basically the developments. We'll have to see if indeed, even though Hamas is, in its eyes fighting for its life right now, if it feels like it wants to cut a deal. Let's not forget that the IDF operation, even though all the headlines and all that we're talking about is what is going on in Iran much more dramatically, but all of the active duty ground forces brigades are in the Gaza Strip. They're continuing their operations, and they control most of the Gaza Strip right now. So that is continuing to move forward, and that I'm sure is adding a lot of pressure to Hamas as well. And just finally, on the aid front, Israel sees the provision of aid, in its new form in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, without giving Hamas the opportunity to take charge of it, as a key to ending Hamas's civil control over Gazans. Even though there's been a lot of violence around it and a lot of criticism and a lot of disorder, you just need to see some videos of it and you'll see how disorderly it is. It continues to expand. So yesterday you had 4 sites opened for the first time. So that's 2 in Tel Sultan in Rafah, 1 in Khan Younis, and then 1 in Nahal Gaza, Wadi Gaza, south of Gaza City. And for the first time, they've given out over 3 million meals in a day. So that seems to be expanding as well. The more that expands, probably the more calm it'll be, because people will be less, stressed and less frantic about getting food. So if they are able to continue to expand that and open more sites, I think that's a very good side. But of course, we need to see that the GHF, and if it seems like Israel plays a meaningful role there, pushes for the continued expansion of this program.
Right. As far as I understand it, this is basically the first time that all 4 sites are operating simultaneously. Though at the same time, we're hearing media reports from the Palestinians that there was indeed violence again this morning with a mass casualty event. There's absolutely no video proof of this as of yet, and I'm sure it's being investigated. One note on what you said about the ongoing operations in the Gaza Strip. As I understand it, the 98th Division was moved out, and this is the paratroopers and all sorts of commandos, and they've been moved out of the Gaza Strip to be deployed ostensibly, I would imagine, in other parts of the country. There's more buildup, of course, on the Jordanian border and on the Egyptian border of Israeli forces as well. And I do wonder if part of this decision-making, this ostensible softening on Israel's part to lead to some kind of deal, is again this utter lack of manpower that Israel faces.
So I don't know why that they've been withdrawn. I would imagine it's not to put the IDF's best ground division to stand on the Jordanian or the Egyptian border. They have plenty of reserve forces that can do that. If it's for something, it could be for a refreshment so that they can be switched in, or maybe the biggest threat, of course, is on the northern border. The fear that Hezbollah, though badly weakened, badly hurt, could be pushed by Iran to get involved. That's really why a lot of the reservists were called up, to provide additional forces in case something breaks out in the north. But we'll have to keep an eye on the force deployment. It could have just been pre-scheduled, as 36 is fighting hard around Khan Younis. And there's also significant fighting up north, of course, in the northern Gaza Strip. So we'll have to keep an eye on the deployment there. But I'm going to doubt that the 98th Division is going to be used as a division to stand on the Jordanian or Egyptian borders.
Okay, let's turn to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's remarks yesterday. And he made several media appearances even before his press conference that you covered. And in one of them, he said that he does not rule out plans to target the Iranian supreme leader. And instead, he suggested that it would be a surefire way to end the conflict with the Islamic Republic. I don't know, yes or no, but it is a way. Now, later in the day, he also delivered remarks to the Israeli media. And what were the important points of his remarks? Did he double down on this potential assassination attempt?
So the way he's treating this assassination attempt, and there were multiple reports that Donald Trump, the U.S. president, vetoed an Israeli request or plan over the weekend to take him out. There was a feeling, according to the reports, that there was a window of opportunity and that they wanted to take it and Trump wouldn't let it happen. So it could be that Netanyahu is saying that there is indeed a plan and therefore I don't want to say no. He's saying we'll do what we need to do. Or he just wants that possibility to hover over Khamenei's head, and he feels like that'll be a way to push him into kind of giving up and agreeing to a very strict and a very firm nuclear deal, something that Israel would want. So there could be both. But that is definitely an option that Israel is not saying is off the table, even though they're not saying that is actively a possibility. That seems to be what he's doing there.
Lazar, what would you say are, in fact, the stated goals of this war with Iran at this point?
Yeah, so it's not me saying it, it's what they've said specifically. There's two major elements. One is the nuclear program, of course, and it's not to destroy the nuclear program. Let's be honest. They're not going to totally destroy it. The idea is to damage it badly and to set it back a number of years. Ideally, it never gets restarted, or Iran agrees to a deal in which takes apart, which the deal itself will contain the destruction of Iran's nuclear program within it and no enrichment on Israel. So that's number one. Number two is the ballistic missiles. What is hitting Israel right now is this ballistic missiles. There is intelligence from Israel that Iran made the decision during the post-October 7th war that it needs to very quickly ramp up its production and get to something like 300 a month. So within 6 years, they'll have 20,000 ballistic missiles. So if you think right now, we think they have about 2,000 at the beginning of this operation. So if you multiply that by 10, and you can see how damaging that would be, and how much of a threat that would be. Those are the two major ones. The general one is that damage Iran's ability to threaten us, to create its proxy network. But if you want to look at the two twin goals here, it's the ballistic missiles and, of course, the nuclear program.
In his remarks last night, I mean, our prime minister has such great rhetoric in Hebrew and in English. Nobody can take that away from him. But it appeared to me that in terms of the nuclear program, he was using idioms such as give it a root canal, which to me sounds like it's more than just set it back. It sounds like Israel's goal is to actually completely destroy it. What do you think?
Israel can't completely destroy it. There's sites that Israel itself can't get to, most prominently the Fordo site. And even if it destroys, let's say, the Fordo site, which will be, it's the underground one of the underground ones, which is deep, inside of a mountain, it's not like Iran doesn't have the knowledge and the ability to get it going again. So at best, we're not going to force Iran to say, I'm not going to restart that. If they make the decision they want to go for nuclear enrichment again and start creating weaponization, they can do that. Hopefully we'll pick up on it and we'll probably strike again. But there's no way that we can decide for them whether they're going to totally move away from that. I will note that in the past two Israeli operations against enemy nuclear sites, so that's the Osirak reactor in Iraq in 1981, the Deir ez-Zor reactor in Syria in 2007. First of all, there was no retaliation by both of those parties, and we didn't talk about it much, but there was no return to actively pursue that nuclear program.
All right, let's go to a short break.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride, just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that, the fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic reporter, Lazar Berman. So we're hearing reports that downtown Tehran appears to be emptying out with many of the shops closed, including the city's ancient Grand Bazaar, which is usually open pretty much all the time, every single day, unless there's some kind of state of emergency. And so the question is there a bit of a state of emergency in light of U.S. President Donald Trump's impromptu evacuation call for the entire city yesterday night? He cited what he said was the country's rejection of a deal to curb the nuclear weapon development as the conflict between Israel and Iran appears to be poised for further escalation. So that is always the question. Are we on the brink of further escalation? And if so, can Israel go it alone?
Yeah, so Tehran residents certainly took the president's warning very seriously as a possible indication that America was going to get involved. Of course, you have aircraft carrier group being moved closer to the Middle East, the Nimitz group. And then there was a lot of refueling aircraft that have been moved from North America to Europe. So it seems like at least forces are being positioned. Again, this is also could be part of an attempt to pressure Iran to give up and to negotiate a nuclear deal on terms that are much more favorable to Israel. But there continues, I think, to be a possibility. I don't think that it's necessarily likely at this stage that America is going to get involved. We can be certain there's plenty of Trump backers and advisors who are telling him no more wars in the Middle East. And it is also a benefit to Israel to show that it can do it itself. Of course, there's that big problem of the Fordo plant, which we don't have the massive ordnance penetrators, those bunker busters, that the 30,000 pounders that could probably break through. That we just don't have that capability. It's a question of what we can do with our own bombs and whether we would use a ground attack by commandos. So that all remains to be seen. But that is, I don't know if the term escalation here is necessarily because what are the possibilities of quote unquote escalation? The big one I think would be if Iran decides that it's getting desperate, and this would be totally foolish on its part, if it strikes U.S. forces in the region, whether in Bahrain, in northern Iraq, I doubt in Qatar, but maybe a ship or somewhere, that would be a big one. If it carries out a terrorist attack, let's say in Europe, or if it strikes American allies, the Saudis, the Emiratis, or the Bahrainis, that would be a major escalation. Of course, if they start targeting something else in Israel, so they've been hitting residential sites, which has brought a new Israeli response. But if they, hit maybe some core sites in Jerusalem, if they lead to a mass, there's been some significant casualties, but a mass casualty event, like we doubled, dozens of deaths, God forbid. But I think that would certainly escalate this in terms of what Israel does. Then we could see them going after civilian leadership and some more targets, but and maybe trying to decimate Iran's oil industry. But so far, Israel has kept those options available, but has not gone for them. And I think on purpose, so that Iran knows that this could get worse if it starts to expand what it's doing.
So let's talk about what happened at the G7. And this morning, President Donald Trump denied that the reason he left the G7 summit was for work on the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And in a very Trumpian way, he responded saying, wrong, to President Emmanuel Macron's allegations that was the reason that he left the summit. Trump said, wrong. He has no idea why I'm now on my way to Washington, but it certainly has nothing to do with a ceasefire. Trump wrote this on his Truth Social platform, and the president said that he is working on something much bigger than that. So while Trump was still at the G7, there was a joint declaration that was signed. What was the statement that was signed before Trump left?
So not surprisingly, they called for de-escalation and put the onus on Iran and the danger of its nuclear program. So that's a very good statement for Israel. It didn't condemn Israel for the attacks in Iran. That's exactly what we want to see from our Western allies. So now, in terms of Macron, I think it's pretty reasonable that he thought that Trump was going back to talk about a ceasefire, because that's what Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, said as well. So I don't know why Trump denied it, but it seemed to be that's what his people were saying. So we don't know why he left the G7 early to hurry back to Washington.
Well, just to close out the statement that Trump gave, he said, whether purposefully or not, Emmanuel always gets it wrong. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
That's what Trump said. Now, let's stay in Paris, where Israel had a bit of a black day in the past few days, and that is because French authorities erected black partition walls around Israeli company exhibits displaying offensive weapon systems at the Paris Air Show. So tell us about what was on display and what was covered up.
Yeah, so you had 9 Israeli companies going to this biannual, every 2 years, Paris Air Show at Le Bourget Airport. This is defense companies, this is civilian companies, one of the world's premier defense shows. And of course, there's a lot of interest in seeing Israeli companies. These are things that, unlike a lot of French companies, are being proven on the field of battle in very impressive ways. The French say that they made it clear to the embassy to tell the companies that defensive weapons are fine. Offensive weapons, especially because they have concerns of what's going on in Gaza, will not be welcome. An Israeli diplomat that I spoke to yesterday says there were discussions, but we never agreed to those terms. Anyway, what ended up happening is overnight on Sunday, the companies came back and found that much of their sections with the offensive weapons were cordoned off with these black partitions, and they wrote some messages decrying the French decision on the black curtains, and then that was covered up as well. The Israeli authorities, including the defense ministry, says this is really just trying to protect French companies from competition by their Israeli counterparts, who everyone wants to see. And the French deny that. They say, we're happy to have them, but we were very clear about what the limitations are. So you have 2 different versions. There's a lot of anger, and this happens every time there's an air show, there's a defense show in Paris. There's some attempt, and it seems to always come from Macron, to ban Israeli companies, and then we get into this fight. But you can be certain that people who are serious about finding the best and the most innovative stuff really want to see what Israel has to offer.
And just to clarify, it's only Israeli companies that are being targeted and being asked not to show offensive weapons, only defensive.
Yep, and you had condemnation of that even from President Herzog himself. And there's a feeling that this is like putting Jews back into their little ghettos again and separating them. Of course, this ties into a lot of history in Europe. But this has happened several times already. But I think the companies are taking it in stride. They know that there's absolute spike in interest, and people know how to reach them.
Lazar, thank you as always for all of your updates and information.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.